there was much more. He fathered 3 sons. He fathered 3 sons, as you see here now. Born, he thought to fill his shoes and follow the plow. But plans and ideas don't always come out right. However, at the end of the tunnel, there was some light. I'll get to that in a second or two. But then came the Depression, and many dreams blew. Getting his boys interested in the store was tough as a rock. One wanted to ride horses, the other was a jock. However, the oldest, after wandering and meandering around, arrived back on San V, and his niche he did find. After 3 years, he took over the range, 1952, and established a record our dad would have been proud of, too. This old building has seen many come and go, and it's great to see those old clapboards again to glow. But in 1966, he was put to rest to stay. New Baileys were relocated on the corner of Periwinkle and Hartman Bay. Now it's back in its glory and glee, and here it stands proudly for all of us to see. Welcome to Baileys.
But somehow or another that's changed. And I had plans tonight to start this out with a little thing, describe the store and whatnot. But immediately it got put down. And as you can see, something got turned out pretty good though. Now, we do have between ourselves a few differences of opinion as to the work ethic of the other 2 brothers. And I do have to be careful here tonight because there's some people in the back that have been here a lot longer than some of the rest of you. Some people whose father used to run the ferry and whose father used to run the telegraph office at Ponderosa, such as that. Mr. Chappelle, Mr. Crumpler, they're sitting in the back there. Another guy named Wiles and his family used to live here on the Allen farm. So they might have a tendency, if we drift off and tell a few well, not lies, but little verifications to correct it. And except for them maybe on the island here, I've probably been here as long or longer than everybody now that Esperanza's gone. I sort of took the place of Clarence Rutledge. And about, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big story in the paper that Clarence wrote about something, and, you know, some kind of wild thing. And I saw Clarence. I said, Clarence, you know damn well that's not true. He just grinned from ear to ear. He said, yeah, but you got to make a good story. So maybe that's what we're doing tonight. And I don't know what John's got to think. So one of the things I'd like to say later on maybe would to describe what the inside of the store looked like. I mean, as far as shelving, because the first thing someone asked me in here tonight, said, there needs to be a big counter down the middle. I said, yes, but it's split. Oh, it was? Yeah. And you can see those stripes on the wall. That's where the shelves were held up. John, you got anything to say? Can you correct what we've said so far?
That sounds pretty good. I was more inclined in the agriculture line of my daddy. He came here as a farmer, and he started out there and got in the store business as a sideline. And he was primarily a farmer till the Fleetman flood and other circumstances eliminated farming on salmon. But he amassed a small fortune, coming here with nothing as a man 21 years old with his two brothers, and farming. And he came from Kentucky, worked in a steel rolling mill. That's all he'd done and everything in the country. But he learned how to farm and was very successful. I remember him telling that when he arrived here in August of 1894 on the steamboat down to the old post office land, he said if there's anywhere on God's green earth that he could have turned around and gone anywhere else, he would. There was no money. He'd been in the tobacco business, and his older brother had wrecked the tobacco business, so they were, and it was right after the panic in '92. So they had big enough. And they had no money, so he stayed here and make the best. He stayed on the island for 18 months before he left for the first time. And that was a sailboat. My daddy was not a mariner, and he felt like boats, about like Francis. He said he never went in a sailboat anywhere that he didn't get becalmed or went aground a boat. He wasn't a mariner of any kind, but he was a very successful farmer. My daddy got started in the store business in 1899, and how he did it, I say, he started out farming and then kept it up till conditions were that it was no longer a feed. There were truck farmers here, and in the fall we planted truck crops like tomatoes. That was our best crop, and we really raised some tasty tomatoes here, and peppers and eggplants, squash, cucumbers. And that crop would play out after the first year, and then we planted the field in corn and watermelon, and for spring crops. And my dad told me that the first big money that he made was that he contracted. At that time, Key West was the biggest city in Florida. It was the sponge industry down there, and cigars and shipwrecking, and they were quite profitable. And then Havana was a good port to ship to. We used to ship a lot of cattle down there too. But anyhow, there was a good market for produce down there. And he got the contract for, they were shipped down on these sailing schooners. There was no motorized vessels then. And he got the contract for hauling watermelons from the fields to the wharfs and the loads on the smack. And he had a team himself, and then he subcontracted other farmers for it, and he was paid a penny a piece for hauling watermelons from the field to the dock. And he made enough money to get in by half interest in the store in 1899.
You know, we've been doing a lot of kidding back and forth and whatnot, but the truth of the matter is that the real speaker and the guy that can tell the story and spin it is Slam. We are really, John and I are really here to make sure that he sticks somewhere near the truth. Slam?
Right. Nobody really said anything, and you probably know it. I don't like to sit down and talk. You always pardon me standing up. The layout of the store. Why don't I just briefly describe the layout of the store, and then both of these guys will immediately correct it. First of all, this building now is located like it originally reason was the opening door there. Many of you knew it when the door was over there. Well, this building, this was the main part of the store, and that room was there, and it was more of a warehouse, I mean, storage than it was anything else, and all the displays in there. We had two big counters running down the middle of the store here. That back end was the office. My father's desk was, his chair was right in front of that window, and the desk there on that window in the corner. He had one of those old-fashioned pull-down roller top, yeah. He liked that old inkwell. He got out of that after a while, but he did have, when he first started, when I was a small boy, he used that feather and the quiver to write with.
Yeah, but it was always empty because the cat kept knocking it over.
Anyway, that little counter that you got in the back there, in the early days, under that counter we had barrels of beans and flour, sugar, and rice, and many of the things that we sold in this store, we weighed up in bags, and there was a scale right there in the corner, and weighed out to the customer. And we waited on everybody. They would come up to the counter, and we wanted 5 pounds of beans. We'd go in the back, we'd dip it up, wrap it up, and bring it back to you. And now there was very little refrigeration. As a matter of fact, the only refrigeration we had was an ice box. We had, and the fish boat brought the ice around. Yeah, that was another time. We used to play games. Believe it or not, we had to have a snowball fight. It bring, and let me tell you something. I'm not a speaker. I'm a talker. So when I think of something, I bring it out. They bring in a 300-pound block of ice, and they throw it up on the dock. They brought these big cross-cut saws, and one guy get on the other end and cut these. They always cut them in 100 blocks, and some of them into 50 blocks. And you'd have piles of shredded ice. And in the wintertime, it would stay there a while, and the kids would run out there and grab this ice, and we'd have a snowball fight. You ever hear a snowball fight at the Saddle? We'd stand on the Then on these walls, all these walls were surrounded with shelves. This corner was closed. We had everything. Like I said, you didn't need it. I mean, if we didn't have it, you didn't need it. I like those, what was it? Three Musketeers when they first came out. I thought they were made for us, and one of those was made for us. Anyway, the whole wall lined with shelves. We had hardware and produce was over there where Boyd was. The produce was on the floor and bushel baskets and so forth, and what we didn't have in the back, and the hardware thing was up there. We pumped gas too out in front. We had an oil house in the back, and we had a place you could change your oil to. Build a rack out of wood. You could drive up and change your oil, get an oil change. We didn't have it. You didn't need it. That was basically the layout of the store. But you want to add anything to the layout of the store?
Well, believe it or not, he did a pretty good job. The only one thing I might say is he said something about produce and vegetables. Well, really, we had almost none because everybody had their own garden. So there really wasn't much food. We had, like potatoes and onions, dried potatoes, and that sort of thing. As far as anything fresh, everybody raised it right here. And the same way with citrus fruit. So really the produce department was and same way with eggs. Nobody bought eggs because you had your own hen house. I'll tell you a little story about the hen house. One of the lighthouse keepers there, Mr. Demery, he prided himself on the fact that he could make a chicken purlieu. I may not pronounce that right, but that's the way we crackers called it in those days. But that's anyway, it's a big stew mixed up with rice and stuff like that. So all these young bucks on the island buttered him up. What are you laughing at, dude? Buttered him up and told him what a good cook he was, invited him out there on the beach to cook his purlieu. Well, he gets there and there's no chicken. Don't worry, Mr. Demery, it'll be here in a few minutes. So pretty soon here comes the chicken. Mr. Demery cooks it up and they all have a great time. Mr. Demery goes home. He looks in his chicken house, no chicken. That's a true story. Huh?
Much about the layout, but Bailey's is so computerized now, you can go in and buy your groceries on MasterCard. And you were in business back in the Depression, and you were dealing with people that I'm sure were pressed with hard times. How many people come in and pay you then when they didn't have money?
Well, I tell you what, you know when I looked at the Depression? I had
Some
a
of them
warm,
didn't pay.
what?
Some of them didn't pay.
I had a warm bed, food to eat, and a dog that would come when I called. I did have a friend up the road. He said that when times got real hard, he said his dad used to charge him a dime if he'd go to bed without supper. And then when he got up in the morning, his old man charged him 10 cents for breakfast. It was rough here during this, but like Francis said, we were never for the want of citrus and vegetables. Everybody, not everybody, but those that didn't have a farm and our little backyard garden, our citrus trees, somebody would share with us. So we didn't have any meat, and maybe.
What do you mean we didn't have any meat? We had gophers, fish, turtle.
Alligators.
Gophers caught heck.
Yeah, well, gophers. I didn't want to go into some of the things that I did. Is there any conservation people here? There was a lot of people that my father fed for years, believe it or not. He was a very kind-hearted man. He never turned anybody down for food. And he wouldn't give tobacco and other things when the charge account got out of line. But he never turned anybody down for food. So we all got along, and most of these people did something for Daddy. We had a guy named Myron Carr, and I don't think he ever paid for anything he got out of the store. But this guy was a jack of all trades. He could fix your car, he could fix your windmill, anything that you had that was mechanical. We didn't have too many things of that, but Myron Carr could fix it for us. He never charged us anything, and I don't think Daddy ever charged him anything for food. So what was it called? Bartering or something? No. A lot of things on the island, and one of the greatest examples that I saw of humanity of people helping each other, we had a guy here named Joe Cypher. Now, Joe was quite a character, and if you want to talk about characters, I got a list here about this long. Either one of these guys will tell you about it. But Joe Cypher was a very, he was very anyway. He was a fine individual, and he was a true Christian who went to church every Sunday. And all week long, now can you imagine, anybody know what a gunny sack is?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. For his shirt, he took a burlap bag. Now this is true. It's not a Clarence Rutland story. He cut the corners out, and then he cut a V in the top, and he pulled that gunny sack over his head. And he wore that shirt. You remember Joe Cypher? You're not as old as
He's
I am.
too young.
Give it, man. She's Anyway, but Joe, believe it or not, Joe had suit clothes. He wore them every Sunday. You heard that song about there was a farmer that had two sons. These two sons were brothers. One was named Josephus. Yeah. Anyway, he had a suit of clothes. And he also had a pair of shoes. Now, he never wore his shoes at all week long. Joe was barefooted, had a pair of pants, and this gunny sack on. Sunday morning, you look out your window, he lived below us. Here comes Joe Cypress. He didn't like to ride in automobiles. That was against his religion, I guess. And here he comes. He got his suit on. He's dressed to the hilt. And he's got his shoes over his shoulder. He gets to right in front of the church. Sits down on the corner of the road and pulls on his shoes. He goes to the church, spends some time at the church. He comes back out of the church after the service, goes to the edge of the road, takes his shoes off, throws them on the shows, and that's the last time he used to shoot. Store employee. Oh, Ed Sherman.
He was modest.
Ed Sherman was, you know, he was, well, Ed, I tell you, I hate to talk about old Ed because he was a fine old gentleman, and he was one of the most unselfish men. He would do anything for somebody else and wouldn't spend anything on himself. During Christmas, he always gave us boys a present, and he always gave us a box of chocolate cherry. And we loved it. We didn't, believe it or not, even though we had a candy case down there, we weren't allowed to eat too much candy. And they would give us a box of, I'll remember, and I talked about my kids, and almost every Christmas, my kids now, they still give me a box of chocolate cherries. Every time I see that box, I think of old Ed Sherman. But Ed was not what you would call the most polished, what do you call it? It wasn't a cashier when you wait. Clerk. That's what you get for maybe for recess. You know? He'd come in if we didn't have it. Joe, Ed wasn't too polished. He'd say, do you have any Camel's bean soup? And Ed would say, where did you got it? He wasn't exactly what you call it.
Tell you another story about Ed Sherman. Ed Sherman was one of the good-hearted, best men I ever knew. And he lived there, but Ed would come and go. He'd always work for Daddy. One time he went away to New Mexico for something like 10 years. Then he'd come back and work a while, and then he decided to farm. Then he'd want to do something else. So he quit and come back to work. Finally, Daddy said, Ed, if you quit this time, no more. You cannot come back on any condition. Do you understand that? Yes, sir, he said. So I don't know, it was 6 months or 4 months later, Mr. Lofton was doing some repairs on the dock, but a lot of Daddy's people were helping him. Daddy went out there, and he was Ed Sherman with a pilot, and they were putting it down with a jet. Ed was shaking the pilot like this, and Daddy said, who are you working for, Ed? You? That is different work. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of contract you get.
Ed was devoted to my daddy, as were most of his employees, as his sons were. Ed didn't want to do anything but work for Daddy. In '44, we had the worst hurricane that we've ever had here. In the summer of '44, normally our rainy season, it quit raining, and miraculously there were no mosquitoes in the middle of August, which is usually one of our worst time. And it didn't rain. It just quit raining in August, and the water going down, so the mosquitoes weren't there. And it didn't rain from July till the storm hit in October. And it was very little rain before and none afterwards, and it didn't rain till the following July. It was so bad that the Cabbage Pound Meadows didn't live, and they're pretty tough. And so it was a really thing. It killed our citrus grove. Every tree we had killed it, lime trees on days of hand. So Ed's primary job was working in the grove. So when he had no more grove, he came to work in the store. And then with the labor supply on the island in 1944 was terrible, about the middle of the war, and it wasn't hardly any labor available. So that was the reason that Ed came to the store, and he loved it here. And as Sam said, he loved to tell people, oh, we ain't got it.
What was the population at that time of the island?
What time?
How many people?
The story I like to tell is that store. And they were desperate one time, they couldn't find, so they deputized me and made me a deputy sheriff. And all you did was, you know, you sat around and looked important, and when the old man wasn't looking, you tried to find a cigar to smoke. But anyway, I counted the voters. And in it was in 1940, I guess it was around 40, 48, long before that. Just for a minute there, I thought it was 48. But I didn't. Well, let's give it a year or two, you know, give or take. And there was 43 voters on the island.
It was the mid-50s before we ever had $100 cast.
The bad thing about the hurricane, we never got, for instance, 35 hurricanes. I was only 11 years old when 35 hurricanes hit. But we got a beautiful report on how the hurricane started and the track of it and how it came up the West Coast 3 days after the hurricane was gone. That was a little late. That was the indication of, I'll never forget, we got caught in Fort Myers. You were with us, weren't you, Dad? Daddy and John and I got caught we didn't even warn it. We got caught in Fort Myers. And Dick Chappelle would appreciate this. Ernest Kinsey, not Ernest Kinsey's father, George Kinsey. George was a German, real red-faced. And we spent the night in Fort Myers when the hurricane hit. And Fort Myers was just flooded. We couldn't move a car or anything. So Daddy got us out, as he always did. He figured if you weren't up and ready to go at 6 o'clock in the morning, you might as well forget it, because you didn't get the day's work done. And some of us didn't like to get up that early, you know. But anyway, he got us out, and we went down to the landing, and he knew George Kinsey would be down there.
Andrew Kinsey.
So George was his brother. And George and Andrew Kinsey, the Kinsey brothers, as it was called. But Andrew was the one that really ran the boat. You're right. That's one time.
Good to
correct.
be a friend.
All right. We got down to the dock, and Andrew Kinsey said, "No way am I going to go down there." And Daddy said, "Look, it's beginning to come." And sure enough, the winds were beginning to subside. Well, we got down to the mouth of the Caloosahatchee River, and we started out into the bay. And I saw a picture of the storm. Ever seen a storm that circles around, and then there's sort of a little tail on it, and in between it is this vacant spot? Well, I think that's where that vacant spot came to, and then as we came out to Caloosahatchee, that tail hit us. And I don't know whether you remember that or not, but the boat Kinsey was going to try to turn it around. And the wind was coming out of the south, and he tried to turn the boat around, and it damn near swamped, and it damn near turned over. And the only way that he could keep the boat from turning over was go into San Carlos Bay. And I'd heard a few cuss words in my day, but I never heard anything like that. His face, you think that a beet is red? A beet would look like the first fallen snow compared to his face. I never saw him like his red face. Anyway, we came over here, and our dock, the boards were flying up on our dock, and Daddy got John and I off, and Kinsey cussed him still all the time. And he said, "As long as you're here, just go by close enough for me to get off." And Daddy took John on the one arm, me on the other, and got us off on that dock. And Kinsey's off, and he's still waving his fist at Daddy, and then heading back to town. We walked up the road, and the island was covered. But that year, it rained 2 or 3 days before the storm. It rained all during the storm. It was still raining then. So there was so much fresh water that the salt water didn't hurt the land.
Didn't have the ocean surge.
It didn't have, but we walked up that road, which is now called Data Road. The water was up to my armpit, and I could see the Gulf, and I could turn around and people say it looked like it was level to me.
He was a little short of that.
One reason more than 3 days running the Henry Brothers steamer line. They want to keep that tradition. We got down there in front of Rafa, and Captain Ken said, if I could turn around and go back, I would. So it was rough there. I thought we were going to turn over. But the wind was out of the south. Time we got over here, it was flat. And the only thing that we had, the county wharf out here, I think they kept it from being washed away. But my enchilada was putting in a well, and there was a number of lengths of 2-inch pipe that was on there. And if it hadn't been for that, I believe the dock would have been washed away. But it wasn't damaged, but very little.
We haven't said anything about the school. You interested in the school?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, all three of us went there for 8 years. And then when Francis went there, we only had 1 room. But the last 3 years that I went, we had 2 rooms. And we actually had 2 teachers. And we had all one that he said, we had the 1 stove and the 1 this and the 1 that and the other. But we did have 2 teachers. 1 teacher taught from the 1st to the 3rd grade, and the other teacher taught from the 4th through the 8th. And of course, as I said, the main event for me was recess. I was very good at recess. So one day we were out, and the schoolyard wasn't too big. It was probably, how big you reckon, 150 feet? Anyway, it wasn't very big. Well, we didn't play inside there. We played, we played out the sawgrass, and we went out there. And one night the other out there, and we found a coach whip. You know what a coach whip snake is?
Yeah.
It's got a chocolate body or cream body, and it's got a black head on it. And they'll bite you, but they don't hurt you. Well, they don't feel good, but I mean, it's not poison or anything like that. So we killed this snake. Well, thank you for something. I'm going to do it something. So I'm going to tell you what it is. But anyway, recess came in, and so nothing happened. Nobody is bad. He doesn't have to go and get her clothes out and whip anybody. So finally I punched somebody in front of them, and they jumped, and it was a little girl. She turned around and said, "Stand your daddy, get out of there." So this woman got up and said, "Come here." She snatched that drawer open, and there lay that coach whip snake with a head snake. Well, we had an additional 2-hour recess. I wasn't a model student. I wasn't quite as bad as these guys make out I was, but we played a lot of baseball, and when we first started playing, we didn't get outside. I don't think Francis ever played when we moved outside. And when the fence was, what was it, 120 feet? Oh, we didn't hardly near that. I didn't hear how we didn't hear that. Well, anyway, it was a short fence, okay? We had a diamond there. Of course, second base was a tree, and first place was a chin bar, and third base was a rock or something. I forgot what it was. And we only had 1 ball, and there was sawgrass over the fence. So if you hit the ball over the fence, you spent half your recess looking for the damn ball. So we made up a rule: if you hit the ball over the fence, you're out.
Tell us about the telephone.
What?
How about telling about the daily telephone?
The daily telephone system?
Yes.
Well, when you talk about 3 linemen, Ed Sherman, Sam Bailey, and Joe Goddard. Have we got any Joe's relatives here? Dick, is any relatives back here, Joe? Are there? I love old Joe Goddard. He was a great guy. But he had a little tendency to like to participate
in libations that weren't exactly the best thing for his health. And if he couldn't get any alcohol, he drank up all the lemon extract we had in the store. He was going to get his alcohol no matter how. And we, Daddy sent us out a few times to work on the telephone line. Well, old Ed was as hard as head. That wall is a piece of marshmallow compared to Ed's head when he wanted to do something. And Joe was inebriated, and I was wanting to play ball. And the old mule wanted to get back to the barn. And we're bringing the telephone line. And we had a wagon, and we had a spool on there with wire, and there were 9 million mosquitoes. Yeah. I don't know what they were talking about. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know which telephone story you're talking about. If you're talking about mosquitoes, the telephone line, you had Ed Sherman and Joe Goddard. Well, after the 1944 hurricane, I've never seen the mosquitoes any worse than they were after that. One of those guys in the back there could verify that. They were so thick. And I say this Ed Sherman, he was about as tough an old cracker as you could find. And Joe Goddard was so full of alcohol, he couldn't feel the mosquitoes most of the time. And I was about 23, 24 years old, and I thought I was the toughest thing in the world. I wasn't going to let these mosquitoes bother me. But these 3 guys were out there, and we had to work in the telephone line. We had to quit at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because we literally lost so much blood. I mean, they were just awful. I mean, Sam did not exaggerate when he talked about the mosquitoes like that.
What did you have to tell him?
Well, you talked about baseball and playing football, but no one talked about fishing. Did you boys fish at all when you were growing up?
Well, I did. I never was a fisherman, no.
I got lots of fishing stories. You want to hear some?
Well, I can tell one about...
John was a better fisherman. What I did was I'd go out in the wintertime on the dock, and the Yankee well-wishers, you know, they came down and they would buy these gigs, you know, and they'd break a couple of prongs off of them, and they'd leave them on the dock. Well, guess who confiscated them? Or the pole would break, and we'd go get a mangrove pole, and we used to gig. Now we had bamboo poles and hooks, and you could drop a line down, and we caught sheephead, and when my mother was alive, we had fish once a week. But when my uncle took over cooking, can you imagine my mother and my uncle? Did I ever tell you about my uncle? Let me get into that.
I can tell you some stories about that.
My mother was an excellent cook. And Uncle Ernest, the only thing Uncle Ernest could cook was rice and tomatoes. He could stew tomatoes and cook rice. You know, he could take his grits and just throw them up on the wall, they'd stick right there. Okay? And he'd get anything out of the garden. And before you put it on your plate, you'd better run it under the sink because there was more sand in it than there was vegetable. And he didn't believe in fire. He didn't, in the summertime, instead of putting wood in the fire, he put palmetto browse in there. Well, you know, they burned for a few minutes, and then he'd put the food on the table, and 2 or 3 pieces would be cooked, and the rest of it was half raw. And I don't know how he got as big as he did, but he ate a lot of bread, I guess. Anyway. We talked about.
Well, I'll tell a story on Uncle Ernest he was a very educated man and very, well educated, but he was a little eccentric in many ways. And he
Everyone.
he liked sunbathing, all on Montreal. Anyway, and one of his positions was head down and rear end up. He'd get out on this packing house porch, position a few cardboard boxes around, and take a sunbath during the middle of the day while people are in the store. Well, there was 2 very dignified gentlemen from the Island End, a guy named Frank Stegman, who was mayor of Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and another man named Ben Pfister. And they probably weren't quite as old as I am now, but I thought they were a million years old at that time. These were two very distinguished gentlemen. So they see him there, and they go get a bucket of the coldest water that they could find. And got around behind and threw it on him. Well, I just guess who got blamed for that.
My favorite story about Uncle Ernest, he was really a character, really serious. He was the original, what did you call my wife that? The original hippie, right?
He was a pain in the neck.
He was one of the first guys that wore shoes without socks. He didn't wear underwear, but he was bald-headed like my father. I believe he shaved his head, but he was clean. He took at least 2 baths a day. He really was. He really was clean. He swam in things and so forth. And the women liked him, believe it or not. But I think if one had ever kissed him, he'd have seen it. But the women that came down in the wintertime really liked him. And one winter, this lady came in, and she was one of the New England people was very highfalutin, and she came in to Daddy and said, "Oh, where's Ernest?" Well, Ernest is in New York. Ooh. What is Ernest? Where is Ernest? He's in New York. He says, well, what is Ernest doing? Daddy said, he's writing. What is Ernest writing? Daddy said, he writes me every week for $20.
Let me interject and tell something here. Sam has said it a couple of times.
Been true for a while, you know.
Sam said it a couple of times, and John said it, and I've said it. You heard us refer to our father as the old man. That is not disrespectful. That's a term of endearment with us, and it came from him. And sometimes we do that. We call him the old man, but we dearly loved our father, and that was a term of endearment. It's not being disrespectful to him.
You know, when I was 14 years old, I didn't think my dad was too smart. You know, when I got to be 21, it was amazing how much that man had learned. Our father there was nothing, what you would say, great about Frank Baker. But if you ever go up and look at his tombstone, on it, it says, he was fair. F-A-I-R. That's on his tombstone. He asked for it to be there. And that was his guideline. All his life, he dedicated it to trying to be fair.